Well, it was supposed to be a government of no surprises, but Joe Hockey's first budget unveiled a $20 billion surprise in the form of a medical research future fund. The CSIRO has welcomed the fund, even though it faces budget cuts of its own. But the Grattan Institute says it's a bad idea that's unnecessary. And biotech companies are concerned the money won't go where it's needed most. Here's finance correspondent Philip Lasker.
It's a health policy that's making some in the government squeamish.
It's incoherent. The one side, the increase in funding, and the other side, the cuts.
It's incumbent upon us to enhance the medical research investment of $800 or $900 million a year that we make now. And I'll make no apology for that whatsoever.
The government's Medical Research Future Fund is bankrolled by billions in healthcare savings, like the Medicare co-payment, hospital cuts and fee increases. The fund will grow to $20 billion, generating $1 billion in income for research by 2022. This year, the government will tip $1 billion in savings into the fund for a payout of just $20 million. The Grattan Institute says allocate the $1 billion in savings now, instead of waiting 8 years when the fund gets big enough.
There's no particular reason why you need an endowment for medical research. It defers the increase in spending that would otherwise have been brought forward. So I think it's a bad move from a medical research perspective.
The Grattan Institute draws a distinction between this medical fund policy and the Future Fund established by the Howard government to pay for public sector superannuation.
That is, superannuation is incurred this year but is actually not spent until 10 years' time or 20 years' time when someone retires. And so that's why you have an endowment for that purpose.
Others hit by budget cuts, like the CSIRO's Simon McKeon, are desperate for increased funding and want the government to sever the link between the fund and the Medicare co-payment.
It would be a tragedy if it fell over simply because the funding aspect of it wasn't agreed to by a sufficient number in the Senate.
Much of the money will go through the National Health and Medical Research Council, which does not target Australia's weakness, commercialising our world-class research. The cancer vaccine Gardasil is an example of how Australia benefits from the development and global sale of a product. Yet the government has cut agencies focusing on getting research out of the lab and into the marketplace.
This might be unkind, but I suspect the people who have engineered this concept don't know the detail themselves. If they continue to follow the NHMRC funding model, then I'm pessimistic that we're going to see any game changer.
Graham Kelly has been running biotech companies for 20 years. He's seen too many examples of good Australian research sold to foreign interests.
The big cost of taking a drug through into the clinic and into the market has to be understood by governments and the necessary help provided. Otherwise, companies like Novogen, all Australian biotech companies, will continue a history of selling their intellectual property at an early stage because they just don't have the funds to take them through.
And Dr Kelly remains to be convinced that the government's multi-billion-dollar fund will be a game changer.